I'm going to put it back to low. But each manufacturer usually has some level of piece they can change. So I'm going to drive up here, and again, if I want to go backwards, see how I push on my heels. They go both directions. So you'll see these things are connected, so you can do it just as easily with your hands. Now again, just to go while we're talking about driving, perfectly acceptable. I can drive. So if you see right there, it doesn't change anything right here. You know, I can still drive sideways. It's just really awkward because I can't see my track, so I don't really know what I'm doing. So generally, you want to have everything nice and square, and a lot of times I just tell people to look out over their feet, and you can kind of see where your feet, where the glass there lines up with the tracks. Now, while we're talking about driving, forward, reverse, doesn't really matter. If I go the other direction, I just need to know I'm in reverse. So then I'm actually pulling on these things instead of pushing them. Okay, let's spin back around. So ideally, I'm going to drive forward. The best way to get positioned for digging is really to be straight over your tracks. This is where the machine is the most stable. You've got that base spread out, the track width spread out. So in general, you should be lined up square to your tracks to dig. Again, I'll show you in a little bit, you can dig off the side. The machine's just not quite as stable. So we're going to start off square to our tracks, okay? So now we're going to go over digging. Okay, so now to go over digging. A lot of times for a newbie, I recommend taking the feet off those controls. Just otherwise, you might not even know it. You might end up hitting that while you're going. The other indicators, if you hear that beeper, that means you're hitting a track pedal. So you might even, right here, I'm barely touching it. The machine's, it's not powerful enough to move it, but I can hear the beeper. That means that my foot's on there. I like to pull them off, and I think for a new operator, it's best to do that. So now, hands on joysticks. We always start extending the stick out. You know, generally the further away from the machine, the less trouble you're going to get in. So it's always good for a new operator to start further away. So I put the stick out, bring it down, and then I usually stop a foot or so. This is where we want to look at our teeth or on the bucket. Now we have dirt buckets here. There are a lot of different types of buckets or attachments on here. Some you won't have teeth, you'll just have a smooth edge. That's usually for digging a foundation where it's not going to break up the ground, but really the concepts are all the same. So if I always err on the side of out a little bit, you don't want to go in, you don't want to open your bucket all the way right away, because right now you'll see I would actually hit that joint that's connecting the bucket. Not necessarily going to hurt the machine, probably not great for those joints and everything in there because you're going to pull a bunch of material right in there. So in general, that's too far open. The opposite of that, if I go in too far curled, I'm not going to get much of a scoop because the bucket's not, it's curled partly. So again, there's a happy medium between having them out just a little bit. Then I push it down, right there. All you gotta do then is curl, right hand, left. Now, you'll see it kind of got stuck. This is where you start pulling back on your boom at the same time. And that'll raise it while curling it. So right now it's curled, you see it's stopped all the way. Raise it up, a few feet above the ground. Then with my left hand is my swing control. Obviously, you don't want to dump too far from the pile. In general, you're going to be backfilling that later, so it's got to be somewhat close. And then open that bucket up. Now the key, again, when you open it, ideally just open it till the material falls off. A lot of new operators, as they're open, they keep going. And you'll hear that. That's the hard stop. The machine's it's designed to stop on its own. Again, not great for the machine. So in general, just open it enough where the material goes out on its own and it's done. That is the first one I had. So if we go in the same spot, generally you want to push down hard enough. Now this machine, it will lift up. The boom cylinder will lift up this entire machine. So if I keep pushing right hand forward right now, you're going to see my entire tracks raise off the ground. In general, you don't want to do that. You want to keep your tracks flat on the ground. So if you want to get to that point where you almost feel the tracks lifting, but not quite. Because that means you're putting enough downward pressure to get, all that pressure is going on the front of the bucket to get a full scoop. Now that I'm there, again, curl it up. It's going to get stuck. Again, if I just pull back in the right hand right now, here's what's going to happen. It's going to raise up. My bucket's not curled all the way, so I'm going to lose that material. That's why it's important to curl while I do it. So if I do that again, curl, stuck, and I'm going to pull back slowly. Now, depending on the size machine you're running, when you do that little piece and start pulling back, you might feel the back of your excavator pick up a little bit. There are large counterweights behind us there, and that's also why I'm digging straight off my tracks. I'm most stable. Obviously, if you feel your machine still starting to tip, maybe you got to open the bucket, not be quite as aggressive. Obviously, safety is key there. Our machines, again, we run Komatsu PC210s, roughly 26 tons. These machines are very stable on a flat surface. Generally, the larger the excavator, the safer it is, just because you've got a larger base. So, most people think that a smaller mini excavator is safer, and I would actually say the opposite. Is because it's a smaller machine, it doesn't have as big a base on it, so sometimes you get more trouble in a smaller machine than a bigger one. Raise that one up, and again, dump it there. Now, when we train, again, we try and do one thing at a time to really keep it simple, but the other piece we want to show is using the stick. A lot of people, when they're digging, whether you're digging a trench or just moving, they want to go straight to the track piles to back up to dig closer. Understand that a lot of these machines, they have roughly a 20 to 30 foot reach. To be most efficient, you don't want to have to move the tracks every time you're trying to go. So that's where this stick comes in. But as you see, as I pull the stick in, it also brings it down. So this is where you're using both joysticks. I have to raise the boom up, stick in, but then again, I can't go in right there. I want to go with the teeth straight down. I'm going to extend it out just so I can get into that first hole I had. And then I curl that one in. Same thing, raising it up. Sometimes, again, we teach our clients to curl it all the way, but as you can see, some of that material will actually fall over the back of the bucket. So for an operator, it's kind of a delicate balance here where you're just trying to keep as much material in that bucket. So you see how that bucket's a lot closer. Now, this bucket I can curl it all the way up here. I can get this thing right in front of me. You see how close that is. In general, these buckets are not going to hit you in the cab. There are stops built in. But two things. First of all, the material's not secured in there. So as you notice that, it kind of jumped out there. So depending if you had rocks or debris, that stuff can come up on your tracks, anything like that. If there were some accessories like thumb, there might be other things if there's not the standard bucket, but generally they're not going to hit it. Now with that said, that's the cab. This thing can absolutely hit my tracks. So you see if I go off the corner here, you can absolutely hit the corner of your track. See, I'm touching it right there. If I were to uncurl, I'd actually clip my corner of my track. So that's also why I said in the beginning, distance is your friend. The further out you are away, the less trouble you're gonna get in, because this thing will absolutely hit your tracks if you let it. Now, I'm gonna curl my bucket. So if I just extend it without curling my bucket, you'll see it'll start to, because I'm not making any adjustments, it's gonna start falling. So I'm gonna curl it as well. And ideally, you want to have one dirt pile. You don't, or if you're doing a trench, it might be a row of material. So who's ever coming in to backfill later has that clean area to fill. So I'm going to dump there. So those are basic controls. Some of the more expert, I'd say, for an operator that's been doing this for a while, they're doing multiple. So you can see I can do multiple cylinders. I can be spinning. I can do all these at the same time. The machine can absolutely do it, and after you've gotten a lot of stick time, you'll be able to get better at that. So, but I always start people, just do one motion at a time. Figure out what each cylinder does on this thing. If you know the different components, you'll start to be able to pull those together. So with this one, an expert is generally pulling the boom in, the stick in, and curling. They're almost doing three, kind of scraping it up towards you. So that looks kind of like this. So if I'm pulling both my cylinders in and I'm curling my bucket, you'll see how I'm getting a nice full and I'm kind of scraping nice and smooth like that. Instead of just doing one, now I can do the same thing going out and I can put it right there. So that's where you really want to practice and get proficient in doing multiple motions on here. So I can scrape it, pull it right in. And this typically is how someone trenching would do a trench right out in front of them. And again, depending on what grade they're going to, they would always start at max reach, get as close, within a few feet of their tracks. And then that would be the time where they would back up, because then they're going to start it all over again. So I would push back. Obviously, I'm looking where I'm going backwards. You've got mirrors on the machine. and I could start that all over again. That is the basic dig controls there. So at any point, if I were to park it, we generally just want to try and put our buckets flat to the ground. We usually touch it. If you leave the bucket up in the air, they can settle. So you want to have that and put the lock lever down. But that's everything with digging. So now let's talk about backfilling. Okay, so now we dug the trench, dug the hole. Now let's just go over backfilling. You know, for backfilling, obviously a bulldozer is great for backfilling. That's generally what is going to come in and do it, but it's not realistic to have a bulldozer on every job site. You know, you take the tool you've got out there. You know, excavators can be used to fill just as much. So with that, you know, part of it's just the opposite, is you are just taking scoops out of the pile. Now the biggest thing people want to do it right away is they want to use the side of the bucket. Well, a couple reasons that's not great. So if I do this, first of all, you're going to realize really quickly there's not a ton of lateral force on an excavator. You know, in general, that lateral swing is just designed to move the tool. It's not designed to actually do moving material. So that's the first piece. The second, it's not great for the bucket. You know, there are the pins that go in there. If they're meant to go this way, straight through towards the machine. If you have that twisting force on them, it's not great for your machine. Usually you only do that at the very end, and that's where you're going to kind of get a grade. If there's this much material, which again is not much here, I'm still going to try and just scoop through it using my same thing I just did on the first one. I may try and, you see how I swing a little bit while I'm in it, so I can drag a little bit over, but in general, I'm using the bucket curl because that's going to use the most. Now here's really important where I'm basically trying to scrape up. I don't want to create a new hole. So I'm trying to move material without going below the surface where I dumped. So it's kind of a finesse thing where you have to pull the boom up and stick in at the same time and try and swing over. And then I dump it out. Try one more out here. This is what really takes lots of stick time to get really good and proficient at doing both movements, the stick and the boom at the same time with some bucket curl. You generally want to start out at the farthest point you can, because then I can just back up to get the closer part. So you'll see some of the first spill I can't reach, so I'll actually drive forward just a little bit so I can get out beyond that little ridge line there, pull that in, and start swinging. Now we didn't have a ton of material here. Now to finish this off, this is where we transition now to using that side, because we're not actually moving a ton of material. I usually tell people, get the bucket, the teeth flat to the ground. You want to try and use that. You don't want to go in like this, because you're just gonna basically create a slope, and you don't want to have it curled all the way, because you're gonna see it's just gonna concave through, and it's gonna create kind of a circular. So what you want to do is get your teeth flat to the ground. So a lot of times I'll touch it, make sure it's good. Then you just raise it off, and then you can slowly start swinging through. If it goes great, sometimes you just have to pull back on it. I'm going to go forward a little bit more so I can get that outside edge. Like that. And again, if I overshoot that a little bit, just pull that material in a little bit. And then I can just use that stick to get closer distances here. So you'll see I'm roughly getting in, and I want to be careful how close I get. I'm still at a good distance here. And if it were to stop, I would just pick up the boomer right now. Right now it's able to move all this material, and I'm just shaving layers off here. And then I can back up. Now once you get to the end here, you saw kind of how I was curling up towards me. The other thing you can do is use the back and kind of rake it away from you. So if you have material that's too close, you generally want to have your bucket open like that. You don't want to go into this with your bucket curled all the way, because you'll see on the back there, it's that same joint there. This is not great for the machine, because you're going to get all that sand material, whatever you're doing, right into the joint where that boom cylinder or bucket cylinder is. So the ideal way, have that bucket open all the way. That way you're just using the bottom of the bucket. And this, so if I push it just straight down, you'll see the stick's not going to go anymore. That's where you have to pull the boom back And then as I can push that boom and kind of push material away from me a little bit. These are the things that are a little bit more advanced that guys that have been doing this for years, there's a reason they're so good is they do this and they get the feel of it. It's because it's tough to keep that bucket nice and level at the same time. You're adjusting multiple different components. And then I can come through and use the side of the bucket again to try and finish it off if there's material left. Not perfect, but for a short amount of time, not bad. So now again, to park it, usually we park it with the bucket flat.